a variety of different things, mainly about Ledger. How many of you are familiar with Ledger? Yeah? Who owns a Ledger? No? Who doesn't know what Ledger is? Nice. Love it. Okay, cool. So my name is Mo. I head brand development at Ledger. And what we do at Ledger is basically we create hardware devices that enable people to secure their digital assets. And today we're going to be diving into what that actually means. Because there are a variety of different ways through which you can own digital assets, and they're not all equal. Some of them are more secure than others. Some are more easy to use than others. And what we do at Ledger is that we try to combine security with ownership and ease of use. So we'll be diving into it, and then we'll go a little bit deeper into a new device that we just announced yesterday. We didn't announce it yesterday. We just announced that we're launching it yesterday, and it launched today. How many of you are familiar with Ledger Stacks? One. How many of you have seen a Ledger Stacks? How many of you have touched the Ledger Stacks? All right. Cool. You did it all. Cool. So we'll deep dive into Ledger ecosystem, and we'll try to learn together how we can protect and secure digital assets. So first things first. How many of you think that your assets are actually in your wallet? None of you. Cool. Your assets are never in your wallet. They're on the blockchain. What actually happens is that your wallet generates a set of keys, a public key and a private key, each time you create a new account. And basically what your wallet does is that it holds that private key secure. The assets always remain on the blockchain, but the blockchain doesn't discriminate. So when you go to a bank and you create a bank account, it wants to know who you are. You need to give a proof of identity in order for you to, when you go to the bank, in order to make any transfers, to be able to prove that you are you. For the blockchain, it doesn't care. It just cares who owns the private key and who's signing a transaction with a private key. So the private key is basically the most important thing that you need to secure, because it's basically the proof of you to the blockchain. So yeah, that's what I was saying. You are the owner of this asset. The public key is more like your public address. Think about it like a letterbox. The public key is the address of the letter, and then the private key is the key that opens the letter box. So with a wallet, you can create a multitude of different sets of public and private keys, and that is basically how you manage your different assets. So how to own and protect this private key? Actually, there are three different ways that you can actually own digital assets. There are exchange accounts, Coinbase, Kraken, Binance. Probably everyone in this room owns crypto. You've probably all created an exchange account. And this is called a non-custodial solution, which means that it's basically someone that custodies your asset for you, and you don't necessarily own the private key. What you do is that you create an account with your address, email address and password, and basically you trust an intermediary to manage your assets for you. Then you have software accounts. So these are the different apps that you have on your phone, and you can use them as well on your laptop or computer. And then you have hardware wallets, and these are called non-custodial, self-custodial solutions. I think I said non-custodial for the first one. It's actually custodial. That's a mistake on my end. So basically, you have self-custody, and then you have custody, where you entrust the third party. So let's kind of evaluate them, the three. So with exchange accounts, it's actually very easy to use. You only need an email and a password. In terms of security, most exchanges are actually quite secure. Obviously, you do have hacks from time to time, but well insured. You definitely have like Mt. Gox and FTX. Let's not discard these, but in general, they do a pretty fair job when it comes to security. But then when it comes to ownership, you actually don't really own your assets. Your assets, can, if the exchange is hacked, or if it goes bust, or if it faces certain seizures, you're not the one in control of your assets. Then if you, obviously needed to highlight that again, FTX is a good example of why you shouldn't necessarily be keeping the biggest portion of your net worth on an exchange. And that really highlights the fact that if you don't own your keys, they're not really your coins. So not your keys, not your coins. Your digital assets are on the blockchain, and you need to be able to secure your private keys in order to be the true owner of your assets, right? So what is a private key? A private key is actually a series of 252 alphanumerics, which is very, very hard to back up. But there is, this innovation that happened in the space. It's called a recovery phrase. And this phrase is, can be 12, 16, or 24 words. And consider this to be the master key. So with any wallet, you can create multitude sets of public and private keys, but with one sentence, you can back up all of your private keys. And it's kind of a user-friendly way of making sure that all of these like weird numbers that are very hard to back up can actually be backed up with a series of words that would then enable you to recover your private keys in any other wallet. So, number one rule, never give your 24-word seed phrase to anyone. Do not safeguard it digitally. Don't take a picture of it. Don't put it on the cloud. Don't put it in your notes. Because if you put it anywhere online, you are basically exposing it to the threats of the internet. And the internet is a very scary world. All it takes is for you to click on a link, or sometimes now today with zero-day clicks attacks, you don't even have to click on a link. You can receive an SMS on your phone, and your phone can be infected. So it's good to keep it offline. So when you self-custody, you become your own bank, which is a lot of responsibility. I don't know if any of us like the idea of becoming your own bank. Obviously, it comes with a lot of freedom, but with big freedom comes big responsibility, and we really need to be aware of the responsibility and what it entails. So moving to software wallets. Software wallets are incredible because they're the entry point to self-custody. So most of us who start self-custodying, we download Phantom or MetaMask, and this is how we start our journey in the NFT world. You couldn't access NFTs without MetaMask or Phantom, or any of, if you're using Tezos, any of the other wallets. So they're great at ownership, they're very easy to use, but they're very bad at security. And the problem is not the software wallets themselves, the problem is the hardware on which they operate, because they operate on Web 2 hardware. So Web 2 hardware is any type of hardware that is connected to the internet. It's your mobile phone, it's your laptop. And if you think about it, like Web 2 was all about sharing information. So Web 2 hardwares are designed to share information. That's why you can log into, Uber with Google and into, Airbnb with Facebook, etc. It's all kind of merging together. But what you're doing when you're generating your private keys on an internet-connected device is that you're generating a secret on a device that is designed to share information. So you see the conundrum there. There's something that doesn't necessarily fit. And software wallets are great, but the devices on which they operate are not great at protecting value or secrets. And this is where hardware wallets come in. We've been through this. So this is where hardware wallets come in. So they provide you with the ownership. They are great at security, but they definitely need to do better at ease of use, because before today, actually, most Ledger devices looked like this USB stick where you had two buttons and you had to click on these two buttons on a very small screen in order to be able to visualize the details of every transaction. So for the degens or the folks that have been around for a few years, this seems pretty normal. But if you're talking to new people that are just entering this space, it's actually quite intimidating. So what we announced, let me grab it from my pocket. My pockets are full, actually. What we announced today is actually Ledger Stacks. It looks slightly different. It has a screen, and you can basically use it as if you're using your phone. It's a secure touch screen. And we'll get into the differences between a screen and a secure screen in just a few minutes, actually. But the idea is to own your keys, have better security, and then we need to really start doing better at ease of use in order to provide the ecosystem with the user experience that it needs in order to become ready for mass adoption, whatever that means. Okay, so we've been through this. Obviously, private keys are stored on your smartphone, which is not secure, but when you do it with a ledger, it's actually generated and secured by a secure element chip. And we'll get into that in a few seconds. Again, with a ledger, you basically can create different sets of accounts for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tezos, and hundreds of other blockchains, and they're all backed up by that recovery phrase. which obviously is a single point of failure, so you definitely need to secure it offline, never share it with anyone, and so on and so forth. Not all hardware wallets are created equal. With Ledger, we've been doing this for over 10 years, and we've sold 6 million devices. Not a single Ledger device has ever been hacked, and we are pretty proud of that because it takes a security model for it to function this way. And sometimes it's better to go slow, but make sure that the security model is right, than go too fast and take too many risks. And that's one of the reasons why we were late with Stacks, and some of you in the room have probably been waiting for it or asking for it. So what is Ledger's security DNA? It's actually 5 different pillars. First of all is this chip inside the device. So when I was talking about the fact that not all hardware wallets are created equal, it's because we don't all use the same chips. And that might sound too technical or might sound like something you shouldn't be interested in. But if you are actually really interested in securing your assets, you should really be curious about what is actually part of the device that you are using to secure your value. And there are a lot of wallets in the space that use MCU chips. These are chips that you can find in microwaves, for instance. And they could be considered to be open source and the code is auditable, but they are vulnerable to physical attacks. If someone actually steals your hardware wallet, they can use different methods in order to extract the private key out of the wallet. With Ledger, we use a secure element chips. So these are the chips that you can find in your biometric passports or credit cards, chip and pin technology. And this was an innovation because Ledger was actually the first company to use a secure element chip to generate and safeguard private keys. And this is definitely, the chip itself, we don't manufacture it. So we work with partners in the space that are experts in the secure element world. But the overall model around that chip is where we started innovating a few years ago and where we got to date with Ledger Stacks. And then, on top of that, with the Ledger device, exactly how it functions is that if you are managing, dozens of different cryptocurrencies at the same time, there's a problem, which is that you're downloading different apps on your device. And with different apps downloaded on the device, you have all of these, different functionalities that need to be isolated in some way in order for each communication with the different blockchains to be secure. And this is where we kind of developed a, dedicated secure operating system to work with that secure element chip. And on top of that, we're coming to the fact that the secure screen is super important, is the fact that you come back to the idea of signing transactions on an internet-connected device. Why is it a problem, like some might ask? And actually, why do you think, like, when you sign something with an internet-connected device's screen, why is it considered to be insecure? Does anyone have an idea? I mean, the screen of your internet-connected devices could be tampered with. So most of the time, if you're using, your laptop, you could think that you're actually signing something on the screen, but in the back end side of things, on a blockchain or smart contract level, that's not what's actually happening. So if you don't have the ability to be able to verify the transaction details, you initiate a transaction using your laptop or your mobile phone, and then you're able to verify the details of that transaction on a secure screen, this is the only way for you to have a guarantee that whatever you're signing is actually whatever is going to happen. And that's why the idea of having a wider screen that's easier to use and easier to navigate is super important, because if you're not able to verify everything on a secure screen that's connected to the secure element chip, you're always going to be prone to signing malicious transactions. And this is, have any of you heard of the concept of blind signing before? Blind signing? Yeah, 1, 2 people. Yeah. That's another problem I kind of unpack in a few seconds as well. But if you're signing transactions without knowing the ramifications of those transactions, you're kind of YOLO signing. It's like, signing a blank check. Doesn't make sense. Even if your keys are secure, if you end up signing something and you don't know what it's going to do to your assets, doesn't matter if your keys are secure, right? So yeah. So with Stacks, the idea is to have the world's first secure touchscreen. The screen itself is connected to the secure element chip. It's untamperable, unhackable, and that way you can basically verify the transaction details in a way that's a lot more user-friendly and, you know, kind of guarantees at least a certain level of transparency with regards to what's actually happening on a blockchain or smart contract level. And obviously not all hardwares have those secure screens, and it's super important for you to understand exactly how your screen is secured. So we went into that. Moving forward, trusted interface, super important even with blind signing. It's like, as I was saying, signing a blind check, even if your keys are secure, it doesn't really matter. And what we're working on today, the problem with blind signing is that within the Ledger ecosystem, so you have Ledger plus Ledger Live. Everything that happens within Ledger Live, you know, whether you buy, sell, stake, lend, is clear signed, because when we integrate different services into Ledger ecosystem, we work on developing the plugins necessary for you to be able to read on your screen in a human readable form what is actually happening. But if you're using Ledger plus a middleware, Ledger plus MetaMask to access OpenSea, Ledger plus Phantom to access Magic Eden, if these plugins aren't actually developed, you're actually going to end up blind signing. And what we're currently working on with Ledger and the whole ecosystem is to develop what we call clear signing standards for the whole ecosystem to use in order to enable more transparency in the transaction process. And it's not something Ledger alone can do, because we can develop whatever we need to develop for our own ecosystem, but then if you want to provide an open clear signing standard for the broader ecosystem, we need the help of different stakeholders in the space, and that's really something that we're focusing on this year, working with, you know, partners like MetaMask, Coinbase Wallet, and even Trezor on developing those clear signing standards. So too many scams happen because of blind signing. I assume most of you heard of scams happening in the space where you sign a token approval, you think you're minting an NFT, and then all of a sudden everything in your wallet just disappears. It's pretty sad, but a lot of people have lost a lot of value and a lot of money because of this. And as an ecosystem, we can't really, you know, welcome, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of people if it's actually considered to be unsafe or this unsafe to be able to you know, interact or you know, experience the ecosystem. So with blind signing, if you look at here, you're actually signing a transaction, but you have hex data in front of you. You probably have an amount, but you don't necessarily understand what's actually happening. It's kind of non-decoded data. With clear signing, the idea is to provide the decoded data. So you know that you're reviewing a swap on Uniswap, that's the intent. It's telling you that you're interacting with a smart contract from Uniswap. You know who you're actually getting the value from and the total amount. So you're actually able to verify what is happening, which is you know, incredibly important. So that's just an example of a blind signature, and then an example of a clear signature. And then another layer to the security model is the PIN code. Sounds pretty straightforward, but it's actually incredibly important. You don't choose your recovery phrase. Your device generates your recovery phrase during the initialization process. And please never use a preceded device. There are a few actually scams that happened a couple of years ago where people received Ledger devices with scratch cards, and someone had actually seeded the device previously with a seed. They put the scratch card inside, and because the person that received a Ledger device that was tampered with thought that the recovery phrase actually came with the device, they input that recovery phrase in the device, and obviously the hacker or the scammer in that way had another device with that same recovery phrase, and as soon as the person transferred the value on the first device, they siphoned everything. If you are receiving a Ledger device, just make sure that the seed is actually generated during initialization. And when you connect it to Ledger Live, it's always going to tell you whether the device is authentic or not. So that's for the recovery phrase. But what about the PIN code? The PIN code is actually something that you choose when you actually set up your Ledger. So it can be 4 or 8 digits. Obviously, highly advisable to use 8. It's harder to hack. And what it does is basically it secures your device for day-to-day use. If someone inputs the PIN code 3 times incorrectly in a row, the device factory resets. So if you leave your ledger here and someone finds it, they're going to have to guess your PIN code 3 times in a row. If it's 8-digit, it's practically impossible. And then if they do it 3 times in a row and they don't succeed, the device factory resets. They can use it as their own ledger, so you know, good for them. But your assets are actually secure. And then the last piece of the security model, and this is really something that we're really proud of at Ledger, is Ledger Donjon. So we have our own team of white hat hackers. They are a team of research and development engineers that have been working for the past decade on developing that model and then constantly testing our products and devices, but not only our devices across the ecosystem, and finding vulnerabilities, patching them, and then when we find vulnerabilities in other devices from other manufacturers, we actually communicate with them to tell them exactly what we found and how they can work on solving them. So every day, actually, your Ledger device is getting tested, and whenever a vulnerability is found, the firmware updates actually patch these vulnerabilities in order to make sure that no hackers can exploit them. So Ledger's security DNA is designed to protect you from countless hacks and vulnerabilities, but it doesn't protect you from mistakes. And this is exactly where probably 90% of the people that end up losing their assets fall. And the mistakes are countless. You can sign a malicious transaction, you can give your seed phrase away, someone can impersonate a customer support agent and get you to do something. So I don't want to scare you off, but there are a variety of different ways in this space through which you could use your assets, lose your assets. So the most important thing is to, as we said, like recovery phrase as a single point of failure is one of the ways through which people get phished and they give them away. And we announced a product last year, in May of last year, that is designed for the people that are just entering the space and feel that the recovery phrase is a scary thing, right? Like, let me give you a few numbers that are actually interesting. How many people do you think own crypto in the world? Let's do a guess game. Give a number. How many? 100 million. Anyone thinks more, less? More? How much? More, less? No? 400, around 400 million people. How many do you think self-custody their assets? Use software or hardware wallet? Guess? 1 million? No, a little bit more. A little bit more than that. 10%. So 10% would be 40. Not far. Around 30 million people actually self-custody their assets. How many do you think self-custody their assets securely using a hardware wallet? No, a third, 10 million. So you have 400 million people that own crypto, only 30 million self-custody their assets, and only 10 million of them actually do it securely. Why? Because it's scary. And why is it scary? Because in some part you have that recovery phrase, that sheet. Most people are, used to having a bank and having someone to call up and be like, hey, I want to do a transfer, I have this problem with my account. So being your own bank is actually super scary. Self-custody grants ownership over your funds, but you can definitely have scams or phishing attacks that can lead you to lose your assets if your seed phrase isn't securely protected. And this is where Ledger Recover comes in. So Ledger Recover is a service that we developed last year that enables you to leverage on the cryptography that we have in the device in order to encrypt your seed phrase within the device, split it into 3 different shards, share it with 3 different entities, and then if you ever lose that seed phrase, you're actually able to reconstitute the seed phrase by going through an identity verification kind of process. It's actually a service that's not for everyone. If you're already in the space and you feel comfortable securing your assets, you don't want to share your identity, you don't want to share your secret recovery phrase with anyone, good for you. I mean, I'm definitely in that category of people. But if you want to bring in some of those 400 million people to self-custody, we really need to find new solutions that would enable these people to feel more comfortable self-custodying their assets rather than trusting a third party. So I have a little video here, but it cannot be loaded for some reason, which basically explains the exact same thing that I said, so maybe it wasn't even necessary. but yeah, so the idea is that when you actually encrypt the device, a lot of people thought, yeah, you know, Ledger is actually sharing your seed phrase with third parties. That's not really true, because actually what you're sharing is a encrypted shard, and the only way to decrypt that shard is within the device with the private key that encrypted them. This is how cryptography works. You cannot decrypt the shard if the private key that encrypted the shard doesn't actually sign the transaction to decrypt it. So yes, I am trying to go to the next slide. But anyway, to conclude, and then happy to take any questions. The last line of defense is always you. So most of the time, it's good to take your time, you know, not sign anything that you don't feel comfortable with, not sharing your seed phrase, as we said, making sure that whatever device you use, that you're actually, you know, a little bit knowledgeable about what chip is in the device, whether it's a secure screen or not, and ultimately, I think 3 best practices. We already talked about it. 24 words, never give it away. But asset segregation. Who knows what asset segregation is? One person. Okay. So basically, when you're using a ledger, you can create multiple accounts. You can have Ethereum account A, Ethereum account B, Ethereum account C, Bitcoin A, B, C. The only way for you to lose access to all of those accounts is through the recovery phrase. But the cool thing is that if you end up signing a malicious transaction with Ethereum account A, Ethereum account B is not affected. Which means that if you have 100 ETH, which I wish for every one of you, you should probably not be signing transaction with the account that has 100 ETH. You should probably have an account, what we call a burner wallet. If you want to mint an NFT, you just, you know, kind of have a small amount for the minting of that NFT on the burner wallet, and then you have your vault account with the rest of your assets. Because ultimately, if you end up signing a malicious transaction with the account that just has like open to ETH to mint the NFT, the vault account is not affected. And this is just a very simplistic example. You could have like 6 different accounts. You could, you know, categorize them by generative art versus AI art, or, you know, Pepe versus ETH versus, you know, AI tokens, whatever you want. But ultimately, understand the fact that any signature in an account does not affect the security of the other accounts. And then last but not least, unfortunately, clear signing is not everywhere yet. We are working on it. You can clear sign transactions within the Ledger ecosystem, but you can't clear sign transactions everywhere. So you're going to have to blind sign if you want to make the best out of your experience in the Web3 space. So just be very careful what you end up blind signing. If you're using, you know, a website for the first time, check the URL. You know, you can blind sign on OpenSea, but make sure that it's opensea.io, not opensea.com. Because it makes a huge difference. And then, you know, revoke your allowances regularly. Who knows what allowances are and how you revoke them? Few people. Okay, good. So there's the idea is that, you know, when you interact with the marketplace or a DEX, what you're doing is, in order to minimize the gas fees associated with the interactions, you give the marketplace or the DEX an allowance to move your tokens. So you're signing a smart contract transaction, you say, I trust Uniswap, I am swapping WETH for ETH, I give Uniswap the permission to move my WETH. And that way, every single transaction that you do afterwards costs less gas because you've already given that permission. But what it means also is that all it takes is one transaction, blind signed, malicious transaction, that could also move that WETH if you are not, you know, signing the right transaction. So if you're revoking your allowances, it adds another layer of security, because then you actually need to sign 2 transactions, the token allowance transaction and then the transfer. So let's say, you know, you have a punk, we have 2 punks in a you know, very utopian word, and you sold the punk, you gave the allowance, but then you kept that allowance as a smart contract for whatever platform you sold your punk on. It would be very wise to actually revoke that smart contract allowance in order to protect your second punk, because if you actually keep it, all it takes is one maliciously signed transaction that would take your precious punk away. So with that, I thank you for your attentions, and I'm very happy to answer any of your questions. Any questions, please?
Thank you. As far as best practices, do you have some for after you pass away, or is recovery playing any role in that?
Very good question. So Ledger Recover for now is not considered to be an inheritance service. As a company, Ledger, we don't necessarily have a stance with regards to this. So when I speak right now, I'm not necessarily like speaking for Ledger. We gotta make the difference, but ultimately it's up to you to decide exactly how you want to manage this. You know, whether it be by keeping your recovery phrase somewhere and telling people about it, or putting it, you know, with an entrusted third party. We'll get to this at Ledger, but we did not, you know, plan to develop that service in the short term. I think there are other companies in the space that are working on it, but this is definitely something that we're going to have to address, especially as we all get older. The space is very young. It's not necessarily a problem now, but I think within the next 20 to 30 years, as some of the big Bitcoin holders start becoming a little bit older, I think it's definitely going to be something that we're going to have to address as a space. But yeah, to answer your question, Ledger Recover does not work as an inheritance service for now. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you think the recovery service adds more security risk to Ledger in the form of, like right now we currently have like a lot of deep fakes and AI and stuff like this? So.
For sure. I mean, everything in security is about compromise. So it's like saying, okay, you know, the recovery sheet, does it add more security risk? Obviously, if you put it in your house and your house burns down, it's another compromise. You know, if you have a dog and you put it somewhere and your dog eats up your recovery phrase, or if you have a kid that's playing around all the time in your library or whatever, it's, you know, there's always a compromise. I think the compromise with deepfakes is, you know, definitely it's a risk, but it's, if you think about it, it's actually something that is, it's a much wider problem that's going to need to be solved by a lot of different industries, and not just the crypto industry, or not just Ledger Recover as a service. And that's why with actually Ledger Recovery, you need to do 2 different IDVs with 2 different companies, which, you know, adds another layer of security. So it's actually pretty, you know, it's not a seamless process if you want to recover, and you know, it's designed for it not to be seamless. But you go through 2 different processes with 2 different companies. That's only, you know, only then you're able to kind of reconstruct the shards. But yeah, if I told you no, it has no security risk, I'd be lying to you. Obviously, everything has a compromise and a risk. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Any last questions? No? Yes.
So what are the fail-safe mechanisms built in case the device goes corrupt?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What are the fail-safe mechanisms in case the device gets corrupted for some reason?
What are, the first part of the question I didn't hear. The second part is if the device gets corrupted, sorry.
Yeah. So what's the solution? If the device gets corrupt, what happens?
What do you mean by the device gets corrupted?
Okay, so if there is a virus and you're using your ledger and it's attacked by a virus and it doesn't function properly. Either the memory gets erased or you lose access to the keys. Something happens technical or physically it gets damaged.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Okay, that's 6 questions in one. I'll try to go one by one. What if your device gets lost? You have your physical recovery phrase, you can regenerate your private keys. Device gets stolen, same thing. This third one was virus affects your device. Practically impossible because you have everything in the secure element chip, and you know, if you decide to like kind of infect the device with a virus, you'd have to actually do it from, you know, infecting the firmware that's actually being updated in the device. And the firmware is being developed internally at Ledger, it's being audited by third parties, so no one can actually infect your device with a virus because your device is not connected to the internet, so how would they do it? There needs to be an entry point to the device for you to be able to infect it with malware. And the whole idea of Ledger is for it to actually keep your private keys away from the internet so that no one can infect it with malware. So that's kind of how the security model was designed and how it's been working for the past 10 years. And then there was a fourth thing to the question. Did I answer it all, or is something missing? If it breaks, but you have your recovery phrase if it breaks. So you're always going to be able to kind of regenerate those private keys in another device. Yeah. Cool. Thanks. All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your engagement. It's cool. Enjoy your rest of the day.